All right. Hi, guys. Welcome. Thank you for joining. We're just going to give it a couple minutes and see who else joins. All right. So, this live is about evidence gathering as it relates to your wage theft claim. So, we'll do a small sort of rehash of, the information that we went over in the last live, and then move into the evidence gathering sort of piece. So, if you remember from our last live, we talked about, Jesse and I talked about red flags. So it was kind of like, you're maybe not necessarily experiencing wage theft yet, but, your antenna is up, some things are happening, etc. Just sort of like, what are some things that you should be concerned about? So, and just as a refresh for those who are maybe not aware of who I am. So my name is Catherine and I was a victim of wage theft. Last summer, I worked for a restaurant called Bernie's here in the Philadelphia area. And I exposed my owner for wage theft here on TikTok and then was subsequently paid. And that TikTok got about 60,000 views in 48 hours. So it kind of blew up. And now I have been, focusing my TikTok content on wage theft, trying to bring awareness around wage theft and also give you guys information on what you can do if you or someone is experiencing wage theft. So, so in our last live, we hit some of our red flags. So just to rehash those, things like vendors not accepting checks from your employer, you're not getting a pay stub, you're getting maybe locked out of your scheduling app, or you're experiencing retaliation, and anytime you maybe bring up an issue with your employer that you're trying to sort of mediate or improve working conditions. So those were just kind of a few of the things that we touched on. Some of those are not necessarily illegal, but they can maybe foreshadow future issues. And so we just kind of want you to be prepared so that if you do experience wage theft, you are to file that complaint and what type of information you can maybe start collecting now, to then help build your case and back up your claim of wage theft. Because whoever's investigating, they're an outside entity, they're a third party, they don't know what's been going on. So if you have documents, proof, evidence, etc., that can be helpful. And just as a reminder, when we use the term evidence, we're obviously not talking about the criminal court system. And so there's things within a wage theft violation case that they can use as evidence that, you may think a criminal court wouldn't accept that. So maybe that can't be accepted. It's a civil process. So, there's a lot of different things that they'll accept, as evidence to back up your claim. So, so we're going to kind of dive into some of those. So, if you are experiencing issues, tip number one of evidence gathering would be to save / collect any shift review receipts. So if you work for, I'm so glad you did what you did. I remember working in Bernie's with you. Oh, Demira. Hey. I would love to connect with you, Demira. I didn't know where you went, like after Bernie's. So, you were like someone that was like on my list of someone to like try to find, but I didn't know where to find you. So, if you want to like shoot me a DM, I would love to chat like outside of live. But thank you for being in the live and supporting me. So, I know when Demir and I were at Bernie's, when we would clock into the POS system, the point of sale system, you could print out, your shift review receipt at the end of your shift. So it would say timestamp, this is what time I clocked in, this is what time I clocked out. It has a date, it has a summary of your tips that you made, credit card and cash, etc. So that is like proof that you worked on that date and during those hours. So regardless of like what your employer could be saying, they never worked for me. Well, I have a shift review receipt right here that says, it says Joe's Restaurant, it has your name and it has the date and the time that you clocked in and clocked out. Well, you can't really you know what I mean? You can't really say that they didn't work there when they have the receipts to prove it, right? So if you have the ability to save those, start saving those. If you haven't been saving those in the past, now's a great time to start. If your POS system gives you the ability to go back and print old shift review receipts, I would definitely recommend doing that as well. But with a quick note of kind of be cautious about it, right? Nothing that we're talking about here is illegal, so it's well within your right to do these things. It's your right to save your shift review receipts for your own records, but not everyone is going to be supportive of you filing a wage theft complaint and taking your case to the Department of Labor, rightly or wrongly. And so you just don't want to tip off someone who could possibly fire you or tell management or something like what you're doing. They might get a little bit suspicious. So, you print your shift review receipt for that day, maybe print 2 or 3 old ones and at a time, right? Don't go on a printing spree and print 100 because obviously that's very noticeable. And so, yeah. Next, we are going to move to tip number 2, which is going to be, when possible, use written methods of communication to discuss what's going on. So again, you're experiencing wage theft, your check isn't there, right? The next day, instead of going up there, text your manager or whoever, right? And so you can save that. You can screenshot that and have that conversation. It has your name, it has their name, it's time stamped, it's dated stamped, and it allows you to create a timeline of okay, for me, for example, I was supposed to be paid on June 24th because that was payday. And I was told that we didn't have checks. And I told my manager, I said, okay, well, I'm going to come back up here on Monday. Went back up there on Monday and I did have my check, but then 2 weeks later, the check didn't arrive again. And so I was texting my manager, did we get checks today? Did we get checks today? Did we get checks today? There were plenty of times he didn't respond, but it doesn't matter because it's a dated timestamp of me asking about checks. There was other times where he did respond. Nope, no checks today. So again, that's proof. He's saying, nope, I don't have your paycheck. You know what I mean? So he's confirming that there's no, that my check is nowhere to be found and late. He's kind of confirming the wage theft basically. So, written communication like text messages or emails, that's really hard to debunk or for someone to say, oh, what they're saying is not true, right? Because without that written proof or other things like that, it's just kind of they said, right? Like I say this happened, they say that happened. What is there to really prove one way or the other, like which narrative is accurate? So again, screenshot those, if it's in your scheduling app or your whatever your messaging app is for the restaurant, keep it. Don't assume that it will just stay in the scheduling app and you'll have access to the scheduling app for forever. Always have backups, right? And that kind of like leads into our next tip, which is if you do have a scheduling app and it gives you the ability to send notifications to your email, I would recommend that. So the app that we used to use at Bernie's was 7Shifts. And 7Shifts would send you an email if someone posted like a mass message or messaged you individually, or the new schedule was up or whatever. So I was able to go back through my email and see, the messages that had been sent after I got kicked out of 7Shifts. That doesn't mean that there weren't some messages in 7Shifts that I wish that I had had after the fact, but I was still able to get a lot of data and information and records through my email as a result of that. And I know that it can clog up your inbox and you may be hesitant to get a million messages. I would say maybe create an individual folder and set up like a rule in your email so that, anything from that app goes directly to that folder. And so then you don't even have to like check that folder. You don't have to manually move it, but you know that it's there in case you ever need it, right? And so this is all really like insurance, right? So it's insurance against your claim. It's backing up your claim. And so, yeah, organize your evidence for when you need it. Yes, definitely. Because you can gather a lot and it can be a lot to sort out. And so if you start organizing it in advance, which is something else we'll get into later as well, then it can be really helpful to already have it organized, when the time comes that you need to file a complaint. But anyways, yes, if your scheduling app gives you the ability to give you notifications in your email, definitely do that. Next one is save pay stubs, bank deposit receipts, and or checks written to you. So even if you get paid, like let's say you don't get a pay stub, like I never got a pay stub. I still have a check that sometimes, but if they give you a check, it still says your name and it's dated, right? And it's signed by someone and it has a company name on it as well. If you have a pay stub, that's great. It breaks down your total amount of hours worked, your hourly rate, any deductions, etc. So, that is another method of proof. But if you always get paid cash, if you're regularly getting paid on time and let's say you deposit like pretty soon after you get that cash, so you get the cash on Friday and you always Saturday, you have like a record, right? Like with your bank. And so you can show, listen, I've been making regular deposits every Saturday for 6 months, but now all of a sudden my deposits have stopped, right? That is like, it's like, oh, okay, so here's another way to back up what you're saying of like, I didn't get paid on this particular date kind of thing. Not every state requires a pay stub, which means you really got to keep those records. Yes, so not every, like I said, pay stubs are legally required in the state of Pennsylvania, but not every state requires your employer to provide you a pay stub. So it may not be illegal for your employer to not be providing you one, but if they are providing you one, I would strongly recommend keeping it. Also, like, if you're terrible at keeping up with physical papers, like I can kind of be terrible at that. either create a method that works for you. Like I had a manila envelope that you can literally buy at any store. I mean, CVS, Target, the drugstore, like anything, right? Just like a giant like manila envelope. And I would shove my shift review receipts in that envelope when I got home every night. I didn't even have them organized. I would just shove them in that envelope. So like but that was my organization method. You see what I mean? They were all in that envelope. And I like rarely took them out of that envelope until payday. And then payday would come around and I would take out my shift review receipts and add up my hours and add up my tips in order to like calculate how much money I was owed and compare that to the cash that I was given and make sure that they matched, right? And so anyways, that was my like method of madness, as they said in the comments. It was still an organizational method, even though it wasn't like neatly like, you know what I mean, smoothed out and folded or like put into separate envelopes by week or whatever. They were all in one place. And so when I was filing my wage theft complaint, I was able to like take them out, you know, line them up by date, take pictures, add up, you know, my total amount of hours, my total amount of wages that I should have been paid, etc. Yeah, so if you are getting a pay stub, make sure you're looking at it with a fine-tooth comb, because you want it. Obviously, errors can happen, but there's also, you know, illegal deductions, etc., which is a form of wage theft. So, and that can help prove your case as well, right? So if you have 50 hours on your pay stub, but every hour is listed as in Pennsylvania, the tip minimum wage is $2.83. Every hour is $2.83. That's an overtime violation. It's clearly stated right there on your pay stub. You know, it should be 40 hours at $2.83 and then 10 hours at whatever the overtime rate is. So evidence can really help you in your case and building your case. So our tip number 5, if your scheduling app doesn't allow for backups to your email, take screenshots. So whether that's daily or like weekly or whatever, go through your messaging app and take screenshots. And whether you want to create a folder in your phone, and you want to put them all there so that you don't have to scroll through like a million photos when the time comes and try to find them all. They can all be in that folder. Or if you have a computer, you can back them up to your computer. You could, if you have like, if you don't have a computer, I save a lot of stuff. I currently save a lot of stuff, and did when I was in this process, save a lot of stuff to like Google Drive. So obviously that's free storage. And so you could create like a folder in Google Drive and put your photos there and then like delete them off your phone. And then if your phone gets lost in the ocean or something, you still have it, but then also it's not on your phone just in case. Not that anybody should be going through your phone, but again, you know, up to you, whatever works best for you, but definitely like finding a great place to store those screenshots and coming up with a system of like, I do this, you know, either every day, or I do this every 2 days, or I do this once a week on Wednesdays, whatever. Because once you're out of that app, you've got no access to anything that's in it, you know, and it could be like, you could be on the phone with the investigator and it's like, well, we had this conversation in the app, but like, if you don't have screenshots, do you really think your employer is going to go in and take screenshots of an incriminating conversation? Definitely not. You know what I mean? So you'll wish that you had these screenshots after the fact. And if you never need them, great, but you've got them in case you do need them. So next would be, we previously talked about using written forms of communication whenever possible. So that is still our number one method of communication, but we all know that sometimes verbal conversations happen. You're working, your manager pulls you aside and says something, whatever. Follow up with a written method of communication. So your manager pulls you aside and says, hey, thank you for bringing to my attention your concerns about not having a regular pay schedule. I want you to know that I'm going to update the employee handbook and I'm going to create a regular pay schedule and it's going to go in there and I'm going to send it out. I'm going to send out a revised version to everyone. So then you get home and you send them a text or you send them an email or whatever and you say, hey, manager, thanks so much for pulling me aside tonight during my shift. I really appreciate that you're taking my concerns about not having a regular pay schedule to heart, and I look forward to reviewing the updated employee handbook with the new pay schedule that's being implemented. So that is like written documentation. You have it right there. It's dated because you're like, my shift tonight or today. So it's like, okay, whatever this date is, today's 4/20. 4/20, you worked that day and that's the day that your manager told you about it. And it's sort of like, again, it's written documentation that like they said this is what they were going to do. You know what I mean? So, anyways, that is also helpful. And screenshot that, obviously. And then lastly would be if sometimes maybe you witness something or someone tells you something. So it's not something that you can necessarily, screenshot, but it is pertinent to your case. Write that down or in a notebook, somewhere private that only you have access to it, and do it kind of as soon as you possibly can after this event occurs. So, Sally comes up to you and says, hey, Catherine, did you get paid this week? And I'm like, yeah, I got paid. What about you? I got paid, but my paycheck is $20 short. Was your paycheck, was it okay? And I'm like, mine was fine, but I can't believe your check is $20 short. Did you bring that to the attention of the manager? And then Sally says, yeah, I talked to the manager about it, but the manager said oh, that happens sometimes. It's not a big deal. You'll get it on the next check. I'm like, oh, wow. That's kind of crazy. What if a prior check is what if a past check was short as well and I just didn't notice it or you didn't notice it, you know what I mean? Or whatever. And so that is obviously a verbal conversation and someone's telling that to you. And so whether that's on your break or after your shift, come up with a place where you take notes and make sure you date it and you just keep a record of the facts. So Sally came up to me during my shift. If you remember the time, approximately what time, and said her most recent paycheck was short, $20 short. So that's the naming the witness, the person that told you this. Specifically, it was their most recent check. And if you can figure out that date, make sure you include that date. And they said that it was $20 short. So all of that is very specific and factual, right? Can help you in building your case. Try to avoid gossip, right? Rumors, things that are going through multiple people to get to you, because you can't confirm that is 100% accurate and it didn't get shifted or changed within the narration from person to person. And so if it didn't happen to you, you didn't witness it explicitly, or someone didn't tell it to you firsthand, it's probably not going to do much for your case. And I wouldn't worry too much about it. I wouldn't bring that up and think that is going to be useful to you in having evidence. So, and again, when we talk about taking notes on your phone or in a notebook, like, make sure that you are doing this in a private space. Again, like what we said with like printing your shift review receipts, you can't be 100% confident that everyone's going to be on board with what you're doing. Some people buy into the narrative of like, you're going to rock the boat, or like you're going to get the place shut down or whatever, which is not true. But they believe that, and they'll report you and all of that. And that's not fair, and it's not right, but they will do it anyways. And so unless you're confident that that person supports you in what you're doing, best to just do it in private, the bathroom stall, in your car, outside on your smoke break, nobody else is around, whatever, and keep it in a place that nobody else has access to it. So if it's a notebook, keep it like in your car. Don't keep it in like your apron, which you could put down while you go to the bathroom and someone could rifle through it, or it could accidentally drop out or whatever. So just make sure that it's in a safe, secured space area. You can also do voice notes if you don't have a ton of time. You could just like quickly, this date, this time, this is what happened, whatever. And you can go back and write it down later because it's saved in your phone as a voice note. Those are my top 7 tips for evidence gathering. So just a quick rehash. 1, saving your shift review receipts. 2, written methods of communication when possible. 3, setting up your scheduling app to send you backup notifications to your email. Saving documents such as pay stubs, bank deposit receipts, and or checks. If your scheduling app doesn't allow for backups to your email, then take screenshots of anything in that app that you think would be useful. Following up with a written form of communication anytime a verbal conversation happens. So you have a written summary, date and time stamped of when this conversation occurred. And then keeping a record, whether that's voice notes or written notes, whether it's in your phone or in a notebook, of things you witness or things that people tell you or things that happen. The kitchen staff walked out today on, April 20th because everybody's checks bounced overnight. You know what I mean? So specific things like that occur that will be helpful in building a timeline of things that happened and when they happened, and again, building your case with the Department of Labor. And then just a few quick things to note. So these are some things to avoid. So we talked about 7 things that you should do. Here are a couple of things that you should definitely not do. So number 1, if you have a phone conversation or an in-person verbal conversation with someone, do not record them without their consent. So every state has their own laws in terms of consent to record. There are plenty of states out there that require 2-party consent, which means that the other person has to know that they are being recorded. And so if you happen to be in a 2-party consent state and you record someone without telling them, you're breaking the law. But you're obviously doing that because you want to back up your case. So you're doing it kind of in an honest and sincere way, maybe not realizing that you're breaking the law, but you don't want to get in trouble. You don't want to be a Richard Nixon, like they said in the chat, right? So you don't want to get yourself in trouble by just trying to get your money, right, and get paid. So that's why we said, follow up with a written summary of what happened to that person. And you never know, they could respond to that, right? They could be like, thanks for expressing your appreciation, Catherine. I'll be sure to get you the updated employee handbook by the end of the month. You know what I mean? And then that's like confirming your, like what you said in your original written communication summary, right? We had a case where the employer legally recorded his conversation with workers. Yes. And so we're just talking about the evidence gathering phase, but when we move into, sort of other phases of an investigation, just be aware that it's all confidential. And so you can't be recording any types of meetings, whether that's with your employer or whatever, because it's confidential. And then again, you run into consent. Hi, Catherine. How are you? I'm doing good. Hope you're doing well as well on this Thursday evening, Friday Eve, almost the weekend. We are here talking about evidence gathering for your wage theft complaint. So hopefully you found this informative and insightful. So number one thing to avoid is recording conversations without people's consent. Number two, I kind of already mentioned this, avoid taking notes when people are around, or basically be as inconspicuous as you possibly can while collecting this evidence, because you just don't want to have someone get suspicious who doesn't have your best interest at heart. You know what I mean? And even though retaliation is illegal, it still happens, and it's easier to keep your job that you have and continue to build your case versus, getting fired and then having to fight your employer for illegally firing you, right? So, and then again, nothing that we're talking about is illegal. It is within your right to take notes. It's within your right to have copies of your pay stub and your checks, and it's within your right to, prefer written communication with your employer versus verbal communication. So all of this is on the up and up. But like I said, employers that get suspicious will try to take action against you before you take action against them to protect themselves, right? So they think, oh, if I fire them, then hopefully lock them out of the scheduling app, then they're not going to have any evidence in any way to screenshot this stuff and submit it and get me in trouble. You know what I mean? But little do they know, you've been gathering evidence all along. And so you're locked out of scheduling app? No problem, because I've got screenshots to back up all of my claims. And so, that's fine that you locked me out, because I don't actually need to be in your app anymore. So anyways, if anybody has any thoughts, questions, concerns, wants to talk more about wage theft, please let me know. Please put your comments in the chat. If you missed seeing Jesse's amazing face, Jesse will be back. Jesse is going to be joining me for a future live where we're going to talk about what happens after you've filed the wage theft complaint and the USDOL is investigating. So kind of what are your rights? What does this mean? And yeah, we talk a lot about what wage theft is and how you should file a complaint, but we don't talk too much about what happens after that, right? And so we don't want to leave you in the dark, and we want you to be prepared and informed and know what to expect. And so we are going to be talking about that on live here in early May. So stay tuned and bring your questions. You've got some time to prep and think and let it marinate. So yeah. Thank you guys for all your support and your love and your time and your attention this Thursday evening. No one's been mean. Everyone's been nice. It's been great. I'm kind of waiting around to see if anybody says anything, but thank you, Catherine, for sharing all your knowledge with us. Thank you. Nobody seems to have really any questions, so I might hop off. Vibes are immaculate. I'm always bringing the vibes, baby. You can always come to me for vibes. Maybe I need some background music or something next time. I don't know. Elevator music, but like kick it up a notch. I don't know. We'll see. All right, folks. Thank you again for joining us. And I will see you on the next live. Goodbye, folks. Have a nice night.